Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Southern horrors and other writings, which we're behind today on, but that's okay. For in today's episode, we'll be starting Mob Rule in New Orleans. Before we do, let's go ahead and let you know that I do have two ways to donate to the channel if you so wish. I have a Patreon account which allows you to donate monthly on a month-to-month basis. I also have a Coffee account which also can do month-to-month, but also can do one-time solo payments. You are struggling, do not donate. I'd rather you be able to take care of what you need to take care of. Please. If you can afford it and you want to, thank you. I do appreciate it. I really do. Everything's so tough out there as it is. But with that, let's go ahead and hop back into the video here. Mob Rule in New Orleans. And we'll be reading the introduction and a little bit of the part after, because it's kind of long. But anyway, immediately after the awful barbarism which disgraced the state of Georgia in April of last year, during the time more than a dozen colored people were put to death with unspeakable barbarity, I published a full report showing that Sam Hose, who was burned to death during that time, never committed a criminal assault, and that he killed his employer in self-defense. Since that time, I have been engaged on a work not yet finished, which I interrupt now to tell you the story of the mob in New Orleans, which, despising all law, roamed the streets day and night, searching for colored men and women whom they beat, shot, and killed at will. In the account of the New Orleans mob, I have used freely the graphic reports of the New Orleans Times-Democrat and the New Orleans Picayune. Both papers gave the most minute details of the week's disorder. In their editorial comment, they were at all times most urgent in their defense of law, and in the strongest terms they condemned the infamous work of the mob. It is no doubt owing to the determined stand for law and order taken by these great dailies and the courageous actions taken by the best citizens of New Orleans, who rallied for the support of the civic authorities that prevented a massacre of colored people awful to contemplate. For the accounts and illustrations taken from the above-named journals, sincere thanks are hereby expressed. The publisher hereof does not attempt to moralize over the deplorable condition of affairs shown in this publication, but simply presents the facts in a plain, unvarnished, connected way, so that he who runs may read. We do not believe that the American people who have encouraged such scenes by their indifference will be unmoved by these accounts of brutality, injustice, and oppression. We do not believe that the moral conscience of the nation, that which is highest and best among us, will always remain silent in the face of such outrages, for God is not dead, and his spirit is not entirely driven from men's hearts. When his conscience wakes and speaks out in thunder tones, as it must, it will need facts to use as a weapon against injustice, barbarism, and wrong. It is for this reason that I carefully compile, print, and send forth these facts. If the reader can do no more, he can pass this pamphlet on to another or send to the Bureau addresses of those to whom he can order copies mailed. Besides the New Orleans case, the history of burnings in this country is given together with a table of lynchings for the past 18 years. Those who would like to assist in the work of disseminating these facts can do so by ordering copies, which are furnished at greatly reduced rates for gratuitous distribution. The Bureau has no funds and is entirely dependent upon contributions from friends and members in carrying on the work. Chicago, September 1st, 1900. Shot an officer. The bloodiest week which New Orleans has known since the massacre of the Italians in 1892 was ushered in Monday, July the 24th, by the inexcusable and unprovoked assault upon two colored men by police officers of New Orleans. Fortified by the assurance born of long experience in the New Orleans service, 3 policemen, Sergeant Alcuin, Officer Mora, and Officer Cantrell, observing two colored men sitting on doorsteps in Dryades Street between Washington Avenue and 6th Streets, determined without a shadow of authority to arrest them. One of the colored men was named Robert Charles. The other was a lad of 19 named Leonard Pierce. The colored men had left their homes a few blocks distant about an hour prior and had been sitting upon the doorsteps for a short time walking together. They had not broken the peace in any way whatsoever. No warrant was in the policemen's hands justifying their arrest, and no crime had been committed of which they were the suspects. The policemen, however, secure in the firm belief that they could do to a Negro that they wished, approached the two men, and in less than 3 minutes from the time they accosted them, attempted to put both colored men under arrest. The younger of the two men, Pierce, submitted to arrest, for the officer Cantrell, who accosted him, put a gun in the young man's face, ready to blow his brains out if he moved. The other colored man, Charles, was made the victim of a savage attack by Officer Mora, who used a billet and then drew a gun and tried to kill Charles. Charles drew his gun nearly as quickly as the policeman and began to duel in the street, in which both participants were shot. The policeman got the worst of the duel and fell helpless to the sidewalk. Charles made his escape. Cantrell took Pierce, his captive, to the police station, to which place Mora, the wounded officer, was also taken, and a manhunt at once instituted for Charles, the wounded fugitive. In any law-abiding community, Charles would have been justified in delivering himself up immediately to the properly constituted authorities and asking a trial by a jury of his peers. He could have been certain that in resisting an unwarranted arrest, he had a right to defend his life, even to the point of taking one in that defense. But Charles knew that his arrest in New Orleans, even for defending his life, meant nothing short of a long term in the penitentiary and still more probable death by lynching at the hands of a cowardly mob. He very bravely determined to protect his life as long as he had breath in his body and strength to draw a hair trigger on his would-be murderers. How well he was justified in that belief is well shown by the newspaper accounts which were given by the transaction. Without a single line of evidence to justify the assertion, the New Orleans daily papers at once declared that both Pierce and Charles were desperadoes, that they were contemplating a burglary, and they began the assault upon the policeman. It is interesting to note how the two leading newspapers of New Orleans, the Picayune and the Times-Democrat, exert themselves to justify the policeman in the absolutely unprovoked attack upon two colored men. As these two papers did all in the power to give an excuse for the action of the policeman, it is interesting to note their versions. The Times-Democrat of Tuesday morning, the 25th, says, two blacks who are desperate men and no doubt will be proven burglars made it interesting and dangerous for three bluecoats on Dryades Street between Washington Avenue and 6th Street, the Negroes using pistols first and dropping Patrolman Mora. But the desperate darkies did not go free, for the taller of the two, Robinson, is badly wounded and under cover, while Leonard Pierce is in jail. For a long time, the particular neighborhood has been troubled with bad Negroes, and the neighbors were complaining to the 6th Precinct police about them. But of late, Pierce and Robinson had been camping at the doorstep on the street, and the people regarded their actions as suspicious. It got to such a point that some of the residents were afraid to go to bed, and last night this was told Sergeant Alcoin, who was rounding up his men. He had just picked up Officers Mora and Cantrell on Washington Avenue and Dryades Street, and catching a glimpse of the blacks on the steps, he said he would go over and warn the men to get away from the street. So the patrolman followed, and Sergeant Alcoin asked the smaller fellow, Pierce, if he lived there. The answer was short and impertinent, the black saying he did not, and that both Pierce and Robinson drew up to their full height. After a moment, the sergeant did not think that the Negroes meant to fight, and he was on point of ordering them away when Robinson slipped his pistol from his pocket. Pierce had his revolver out too and fired twice, point blank, at the sergeant, and just then Robinson began shooting at the patrolman. In a second or so, the policemen and blacks were fighting with their revolvers, the sergeant having a duel with Pierce, while Cantrell and Mora drew their line of fire on Robinson, who was working his revolver for all he was worth. One of the shots took Mora in the right hip, another caught his index finger on the right hand, and a third struck the small finger on the left hand. Poor Mora was done for. He could not fight any more. But Cantrell kept up his fire, being answered by the big black. Pierce's revolver broke down and the cartridges snapping, and he threw up his hands begging for quarter. The sergeant lowered his pistol, and the citizens ran over to where the shooting was going on. One of the bullets that went at Robinson caught him in the breast, and he began running, turning out 6th Street and Cantrell behind him, shooting every few steps. He was loading his revolver again, but did not use it after the start he took, and in a little while Officer Cantrell lost the man in the darkness. Pierce was made a prisoner and carried to the 6th Precinct police station, where he was charged with shooting and wounding. The sergeant sent for an ambulance, and Mora was taken to the hospital, and the wound in his hip being serious. A search was made for Robinson, but he could not be found, and even at 2 o'clock this morning, Captain Day and Sergeant Alcoin and Corporals Perrier and Trenchard, with a good squad of men, were beating the weeds for the black. The New Orleans Picayune of the same date described the occurrence, and from its account, one would think it was an entirely different affair. Both of the two accounts cannot be true, and the unquestioned fact is that neither of them sets out the facts as they occurred. Both accounts attempt to fix the beginning of the hostilities upon the colored men, but both were compelled to admit that the colored men were sitting on the doorsteps quietly conversing with one another when the three policemen went up and accosted them. The Times Democrat unguardedly states that one of the two colored men tried to run away, that Morris seized him and then drew his billy and struck him on the head, that Charles broke away from him and started to run, after which the shooting began. The Picayune, however, declares that Pierce began the firing and that his two shots point blank at Alcoin were the first shots of the fight. As a matter of fact, Pierce never fired a single shot before he was covered by Alcoin's revolver. Charles and the officers did all the shooting. The Picayune's account is as follows. Patrolman Mora was shot in the right hip and dangerously wounded last night at 11:30 o'clock in Dryad Street between Washington and 6th by two Negroes who were sitting on a doorstep in the neighborhood. The shooting of Patrolman Mora brings to memory the fact that he was one of the partners of Patrolman Trimp, who was shot by a Negro soldier of the United States government during the progress of the Spanish-American War. The shooting of Mora by a Negro last night is a very simple story. At the hour mentioned, three Negro women noticed two suspicious men sitting on the doorstep in the above locality. The women saw the two men making an apparent inspection of the building. As they told the story, they saw the men looking over the fence and examined the window blinds, and they paid particular attention to the makeup of the building, which was a two-story affair. About that time, Sergeant J.C. Alcoin and Officers Mora and J.D. Cantrell hove in sight. The women held them and described to them the suspicious actions of the two Negroes, who were still sitting on the step. The trio of bluecoats, on hearing the facts, at once crossed the street and accosted the men. The latter answered that they were waiting for a friend whom they were expecting. Not satisfied with this answer, the sergeant asked them where they lived, and they replied downtown, but could not designate the locality. The other's question put the officer, the larger of the two Negroes, replied that he had been in town just 3 days. As this reply was made, the larger man sprang to his feet, and Patrolman Mora, seeing that he was about to run away, seized him. The Negro took a firm hold on the officer, and a scuffle ensued. Mora, noting that he was not being assisted by his brother officers, drew his billy and struck the Negro in the head. The blow had but little effect upon the man, for he broke away and started down the street. When about 10 feet away, the Negro drew his revolver and opened fire on the officer, firing 3 or 4 shots. The third shot struck Mora in the right hip and subsequently found to have taken an upward course. Although badly wounded, Mora drew his pistol and returned the fire. At his third shot, the Negro was noticed to stagger, but he did not fall. He continued his flight. At the moment, Sergeant Alcoin seized the other Negro, who proved to be a youth, Leon Pierce. As soon as Officer Mora was shot, he sank to the sidewalk, and the other officer ran to the nearest telephone and sent in a call for an ambulance. Upon the arrival, the wounded officer was placed in it and conveyed to the hospital. An examination by the house surgeon revealed that the fact that the bullet had taken an upward course. In the opinion of the surgeon, the wound was a dangerous one. But the best proof of the fact was that the officers accosted the two colored men and without any warrant or other justification attempted to arrest them, and did actually seize and begin to club one of them, is shown by Officer Mora's own statement. The officer was wounded and had every reason in the world to make his side of the story as good as possible. His statement was made to a Picayune reporter, and the same was published on the 25th installment, and is as follows. I was in the neighborhood of Dryads and Washington Streets, and Sergeant Alcoin and Officer Cantrell, when three Negro women came up to us and said there were two suspicious-looking Negroes sitting on the step of Dryad Street between Washington and 6th. We went to the place indicated and found two Negroes. We interrogated them as to who they were and what they were doing and how long they had been there. They replied that they were working for someone and had been in town 3 days. At about this stage, the larger of the two Negroes got up and I grabbed him. The Negro pulled and I held fast. And finally, he pulled me into the street. Here I began using my billet, and the Negro jerked away from my grasp and ran. He then pulled a gun and fired. I pulled my gun and returned the fire, each of us firing about 3 shots. I saw the Negro stumble several times, and I thought I had shot him, but he ran away, and I don't know whether any of my shots took effect. Sergeant Alcoin, in the meantime, held the other man fast, and the man was about 10 feet from me, and when he fired, and the 3 negresses who told us about the men stood away about 25 feet from the shooting. Thus far from the preceding, the Monday night episode resulted in the Officer Mora lying in the station, wounded in the hip. Leonard Pierce, one of the colored men, locked up in the station, and Robert Charles, the other colored man, a fugitive, wounded in the leg and sought for by the entire police force of New Orleans. Not sought for, however, to be placed under arrest and given a fair trial and punished if found guilty according to the law of the land, but sought by a host of enraged, vindictive, and fearless officers who were coolly ordered to kill him on sight. This order is shown by the Picayune of the 26th installment, in which the following statement appears. In talking to the sergeant about the case, the captain asked about the Negro's fighting ability, and the sergeant answered that Charles, though he called him Robinson then, was a desperate man, and it would be best to shoot him before he was given a chance to draw his pistol upon any other officers. This instruction was given before anybody had been killed, And the only evidence that Charles was a desperate man lay in the fact that he had refused to be beaten over the head by Officer Mora for sitting on the step quietly conversing with a friend. Charles resisted an absolutely unlawful attack, and a gunfight followed. Both Mora and Charles were shot, and because Mora was white and Charles was black, Charles was at once declared to be a desperado, made an outlaw, and subsequently a price put upon his head, and the mob authorized to shoot him like a dog on sight. The New Orleans Picayune of Wednesday morning said, "But he was gone, perhaps to the swamps, and the disappointment of the Bluecoats for not getting the murderer is expressed in their curses, each man swearing that the signal to halt that will be offered Charles will be a shot." In that same column of the Picayune, it was said, hundreds of policemen were about. Each corner was guarded by a squad commanded either by a sergeant or a corporal, and every man had a word to shoot the Negro as soon as he was sighted. He was a desperate black and could be given no chance to take more life. But that ends this part of the episode we were reading. It's already got quite far, but there's still a fair amount of pages for that part, so we'll end right there. But yeah, we automatically see just kill them on sight. They did nothing wrong, but they're black. Fuck them. Let's shoot them. And that's how they're being treated. Don't come to me and say, racism's dead. No, you're a fucking retard. I'm tired of Republican bullshit, racist bullshit, Southern racist fucktard bullshit. I'm just so tired of their fucktardedness. They can go fuck off. This was an unnecessary incident. And policemen, leave it to the police to start the bullshit. Anyway. Yeah. We'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. It can't just be tinfoil hat wearing sources or a bunch of anecdotes slapped together to try to make a source. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.